Everybody to this presentation by the photographer Bruce Harkness. Bruce has a long pedigree, as you know, from his career as a photographer for the city of Dearborn to his decades documenting the urban landscape in Detroit, and not just Detroit, and the people, especially the people who populate it. That's how I first encountered Bruce's work, first through his images of the public and private interiors in Detroit's Old Poletown neighborhood, then his documentation of Poletown's infamous destruction at the hands of the city of Detroit, the Archdiocese of Detroit, and the General Motors Company. So I've been asked to give the Cliff Notes version of the Poletown story, which some of you may not be familiar with, but I know that some of you lived. So what we've come to call Poletown is the Detroit neighborhood, or series of neighborhoods, just south of the city of Hamtramck. It's a working class, ethnically and racially mixed area, like many ethnic neighborhoods built around the manufacturing sector. And it has aged none too gracefully, but it was it was vibrant with small family-owned businesses, with local religious and cultural institutions, and an organic sense of community and identity. It was anchored by the first Polish parish in Detroit, St. Albertus, Święty Wojciech, established in 1871, and it quickly grew into a very densely populated area with multiple churches, and with the church wars that, popped up all over Polonia communities in the late 19th century. It included the Shane Street commercial district, which had hundreds of businesses, theaters, social clubs, veterans groups. In short, it was an old school ethnic neighborhood that was dominated by Polish immigrants and their descendants, but that also included African Americans, Jews, other Europeans, and by the 1970s, Yemenis as well. In 1980, you're going to hear more about this from Bruce. In 1980, in face of the challenges that to U.S. manufacturing, particularly to the auto industry, and Detroit's economic decline, General Motors came to the city of Detroit with an offer it had neither the will nor the inclination to refuse, to build a new modern factory in the city, in Poletown. The problem was that people already lived there. Churches and schools and businesses and hospitals already operated there. The solution was to seize the land through eminent domain, and as residents struggled to fight that power, their efforts were headquartered at the Immaculate Conception Church under Reverend Józef Karaszewicz, and it was helped by organizers from Ralph Nader's office. The Michigan Supreme Court, in a decision that was decades later overturned, ruled in favor of the city and GM. The result was that over 1,500 homes, 144 businesses, 16 churches, including Immaculate Conception, and other community institutions were demolished, were bulldozed. Thousands of people's lives and a historic fabric of a community were upended, and the GM factory and its acres of parking lot were constructed in its place. Not all of what we would call Poletown was demolished by the factory, but what remained was isolated geographically, and it continued to decline as a result. Until today, we've only got a handful of businesses that survived, and what was once one of the most densely populated areas of Detroit. There were, like, a newspaper article from the turn of the last century talked about over 200 children in one single block. It was isolated, and it continued to decline until today. As I said, only a handful of businesses survive, and much of the area is blocks and blocks of prairie. The neighborhood does hang on in some form, though. And in addition to the holdouts, many of whom have been in their homes for generations, young people have also been quietly settling into and renovating some of those old properties, including my employee at the business that I own. So it's still an area of transition. But in addition to Bruce's work on the Poletown demolition, if you'd like a deeper dive, there are lots of resources out there, including the late Jeannie Wiley's book, Poletown Community Betrayed, and the documentary film Poletown Lives, which is how I first learned about this area when I lived hundreds of miles away and never even had heard of Poletown or Hamtramck. But a subset of Bruce's larger body of work, much of which was done with the collaboration over the years by PAHA's own John Bukovchik, who's now a retired history professor from the Wayne State University. Much of Bruce's work over the decades has documented this neighborhood, its residents, and in the case of the subject of today's webinar, the genuine characters who lived there, like Ed Thiede, who was one of those holdouts in the old neighborhood. In fact, I met Bruce years ago for the first time, along with Marian Krzyzowski from the University of Michigan Shane Street History Project, when we visited Bruce's home, which you see there in the background, recognizable. We visited Bruce's home and we were able to see some of the Ed Thiede archive. So Bruce is the perfect person to tell Ed's story and the story of this neighborhood through the years, through his photographs. And we're happy to have him here today and with all of you here to hear his story. Bruce?
Is that my cue?
That is your cue.
Thank you, Karen, very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending. I'm not with you. I can only see a few of you, but I feel your presence. I grew up in rural Michigan, town of Brighton. If any of you are familiar with the area around here, mid 1970s, I enrolled at art school, Center for what is now known as the College for Creative Studies. So it was too far to drive from Brighton, 45 miles down to Detroit. So I moved down, had an apartment down by Wayne State University, and started at Center for Creative Studies in 74, 75. And I soon discovered what I enjoyed doing was wandering the streets of certain areas of Detroit around Wayne State University with my camera. So I was sort of a natural documentary photographer as opposed to having commercial interests in photography. There's an area called the Cass Corridor. I didn't live far from there. I took a lot of pictures in the Cass Corridor and across Woodward Avenue. The east side of Woodward Avenue is an old neighborhood known as Brush Park, where industrialists and businessmen had their Victorian mansions around the turn of the century. I wandered, all walking with my camera, downtown Detroit, and then back out along Grand River Avenue to Warren. So, and then just in undesignated neighborhoods also, just sort of walked around, taking pictures of places and people. And so I did this throughout my 4 years at Center for Creative Studies. And then I took a year off. I worked in the J.L. Hudson's department store downtown. And after that, I enrolled in the Master of Fine Arts and Photography program at Wayne State University. I was there for 2 years. And when I was there, I met there was another photography student, Nick Valente, and he is the one who interested me. I was generally aware of this, the city acquiring this Poletown area because General Motors needed land for a new plant. And Nick said, "Come on, Bruce, let's go over there and start photographing." So in early 1981, we did that. We started driving over the area and taking pictures. We both continued. I think I stuck with it a little longer than Nick did, but I lived a lot closer than he did. He was out in Livonia. I was at Wayne State. So I ended up photographing in this area from February of 81 until November or December of 81. So almost a whole year. And when I started, the neighborhood was pretty much intact. And when it was done, there was virtually nothing left. And you can I guess everybody can see this first slide. This red line is the perimeter of this Pole Town area that was demolished over the course of 1981. A lot of it, can you see my pointer here? I'm working my mouse. Was taken up by the Dodge Main massive auto assembly plant and other things, I'm sure, which was I think built around 1910, and it was closed in 1980. So not really too long before I started going over there in 1981. And then there were all these neighborhoods to the west and to the south of this massive Dodge Main complex. Here is the location of the Immaculate Conception Church to which Karen referred. It was an opposition to the city taking the land. Major Boulevard, East Grand Boulevard, Shane Street, Joseph Campo. Here is a Jewish cemetery, which still exists today. It's the one thing in this area that they could not remove. As a matter of fact, I just visited the other day. It's open twice a year on Jewish holidays. So I went over there and you could get into what is now the General Motors grounds. And I visited this cemetery, second oldest Jewish cemetery in the state. So that's the area. This is an aerial picture taken in 1961, about 500 acres. There. This is a photo from the Detroit Historical Museum archives. This is Joseph Campo at East Grand Boulevard, and you can see that in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, what it was like in this area. It was just bustling with industry and restaurants, businesses, workers come to these factories every day. And here's a streetcar, street just filled with cars and people. This is a big apartment building right at the intersection of the Boulevard and Shane called the Gray Lawn Apartments. Now this is pretty much the same view, only the previous one was taken up off the ground a little bit. This was actually one of the very first days I went over there. Here's the big apartment still looming in the background in the mist there, looking along Joseph Campo Avenue. So not quite the filled street that it was in its heyday. In about a month, I would make my way to the top of this apartment building by going around the back and going through a window and going up a stairwell and emerging through a little door on the roof. So I took pictures in all directions, north, east, south, and west, from the roof of this apartment building. And this is one of them. This is looking north toward Hamtramck. This is St. Florian Church in Hamtramck. This is the Chevrolet Gear and Axle plant, which is gone today. At the bottom is the East Grand Boulevard, and then the streets that were there, Horton Street, Finley Street, and Newton Street. Here's the cemetery that I referred to earlier over here. Here is the Dodge Main auto plant, and these are storefronts along Joseph Campo in Hamtramck. So I would go over the neighborhood 2 or 3 times a week, and I had a big camera on a tripod. So it wasn't like a small camera where I could take a lot of pictures. And I would take 8 or 10 pictures every time I went over there. And I think when, you know, by the time I finished the project, I'd taken probably about 600 photographs. But this is the kind of thing one would come across. Yard sale, GM wants us out, help. I always thought this was, if you look at this card table, the way it's leaning, all this stuff on top of it, and it's leaning, these legs are at an angle, and here's this little kitty sitting here, like she's just waiting for that table to go over. She's watching it. Looks like it's about ready to take a spill.
Okay, now I see.
This was the famous restaurant. It says it right up here in reverse letters. Famous restaurant and barbecue on Shane Street, near the boulevard. Wonderful little cafe. I went in there a few times and ate and talked to the owner a little bit. This is the interior of the Immaculate Conception Church. This was really the center of a lot of the people gathered here to protest what was happening. The fact that they were going to lose their church, they were going to lose their neighborhood, they were going to lose everything and have to move out. So over the course of that spring and into the summer, a lot of the resistance was staged right here, a lot in the basement of the church. This is the last May crowning ceremony. I am actually on the porch of the Immaculate Conception Church. Took this picture of the gathering for the May crowning, and this is Father Joe right here, Father Joseph Karashevitz. He's sort of in the background. It's the only time I ever photographed him. This is the very beginning of the demolition of the Immaculate Conception Church in July. You can see these two workmen are up here. They're cinching the cross. There are ropes tied around it. They're about ready to lift the cross off the top of the church. So that was the first thing that happened. And it didn't take long. 3 or 4 days later, the church was completely gone. This jumps to later in the summer, maybe August, and you can see how this is all plowed earth. Many of the homes were already demolished, and here are 2 remaining homes on Adele Street, I think it was, or Tremblay. This one is already empty, and there are people still living in this one. Way back here in the background is the roof of the Gray Lawn apartment, peeking over the trees. And this was one of the last times I went to the area, probably in November of '81. And this was the last row. There were still individual houses, but this was actually the last row of houses in Pole Town on Tremblay Street. And I went over one morning, drove over, and I was met with a fence. There was a chain link fence around the entire area, and I could no longer get in there. And there wasn't much left anyway, but that was my last trip. That was my last trip to the area when I went over and it was fenced off. The church over here is not in the area that was demolished. This is St. Stanislaus Church. There are several churches, a number of churches built after St. Albertus Church, which was the first to accommodate the growing Pole Town population. You'll see a little bit more about this church as I move along here. Karen and I both referred to John Bukovchik, very close, dear friend of mine, who through a friend became aware of those Pole Town, some of those Pole Town pictures I just showed you, and he was interested in them. because of his background and his specialty, and he helped me exhibit the pictures. We got money to print them and donate them to Wayne State University. We had some published. So we established a relationship, and in the I met John after I was done photographing there, and in mid-80s, John proposed a new project to me in the area south of that Pole Town area that was demolished, and he suggested that we do a similar photo project, but we go into people's homes, photograph them in their homes, and take a tape recorder and do oral history interviews with them. So I agreed to this. I had sort of this type of experience wandering the streets. So we began in the fall of 1987, and it went through early 1990. But by the time it was done, we had done 60 hours of tape recorded interviews with 51 different residents in the area, in 36 households and business. So a good record of people who lived in this still somewhat extant Pole Town area. Polish people, Black people, made contacts through churches and people I just met walking on the streets. This is a Guyton family, one of the early families. I went into their home and photographed them and did an interview with the mother, Lillian Guyton. This is Adela Cheshlock, who we met through St. Hyacinth Church. This is a picture of John Paul II, right? The Pope. And this is Adela here, just about ready to greet the Pope as he moved along a line. So this is her and her house. Her house is still standing today. An interesting lady, very involved in various Polish organizations. This is a business. This was the Buckhorn Inn, which had been on the corner of Ferry and Du Bois Street for decades. Walter Miller, the owner, right here. I spent a lot of time in there photographing this place, talking to Walter. This is a barber, Paul Zamierowski on Shane Street. In his back room, he was a violin player, so when he didn't have a customer out front, he would go into the back and play his violin. And this is Paul also, with his wife Lucille, who taught at St. Stanislaus School, I believe. Her mother, Clara Jozwiak, and brother Joe, her son, and of course Fritzy in Clara's home on Joseph Campos Street. Bonnie Woods, who I also met in the area. I spent a lot of time in her home. Big family, had a wonderful time. I had this little story. I had a handheld camera, and I then had a larger camera. And one time I was out in the porch in the fall, and I set my small camera on their porch, and I forgot about it. And a while later, I realized it was missing. I had no idea what I'd done with it, and I found it on her porch the following spring. So it sat on her front porch outside all winter long. And I went back. It came to me where I'd perhaps left it, and sure enough, there it was 6 months later. Johnny Smith, another person I met from the area. So quite an interesting group of people. Had really a wonderful time meeting everybody and talking to everybody and taking pictures in their house. Cicero Whitlow, who was born around, he was born in the late 1800s, lived by himself on St. Alban Street, very close to St. Albertus Church. Mrs. Simchuk and her family, Marianne White, I came to know and was invited into Mrs. Simchuk's home on Kirby Street on numerous occasions and took a lot of pictures there. This was, I don't know, Easter, perhaps an Easter dinner. There are a few of these dinner photographs here, and you'll notice there's always a chair and a plate for me. This is another family. Here's my plate. So I not only got to meet a lot of generous people and take a lot of pictures, but I think I also gained about 10 pounds during this project because I ate so well. This is the Majewski family. They actually lived just down the street from Mrs. Simchuk. And Estelle Laster, a preacher who I met and visited numerous occasions. Her building is still standing, and it is utilized to this day. This is the first time I encountered Estelle Laster, and this was on the 4th of July, 1989, as I was walking the neighborhood. So she was out front with her Bible, and being the 4th of July, she also had her American flag. So we chatted a bit, and I took a few pictures of her. And I continued my walk. I headed west from Moran Street to Du Bois Street, and I came upon this group. Now this is Edmund Thiede. So we finally sort of reached the subject of my talk. And this is Ed Thiede's house, 5928 Du Bois Street. This is Ed's grandmother, Pauline Lubinsky, who was born also right around the turn of the century. And this was Ed's girlfriend at the time, Carol. So they were out in their front yard celebrating the 4th of July. A couple of things, just keep this in mind. Remember this. Remember this eagle, this plaster eagle emblem affixed at the front of Ed's house. And this tree, remember this tree. You'll also see that Ed's house is set back. It's not right up on the sidewalk like many of the houses were on Du Bois Street, set back a little bit with a little bit of a front yard. This is just moved in a little bit closer to the group. Ed, I got to know Ed quite well, and Ed was a scrapbooker, and he compiled 15 or so 2.5, 3-inch thick binders where he kept just about everything. Certainly family photographs. He had many family photographs and he annotated them. You could see he wrote captions for a lot of them. And this is Pauline, my grandmother, Pauline Lubinsky. So Lubinska, perhaps I get my pronunciation wrong, who was the elderly woman in the previous photograph. Here she is, my grandmother, Pauline Lubinska, 18 years old, and my great aunt Martha, photo taken in 1917. So you can see she was born around the turn of the century. She was a Red Cross, grandmother Pauline, she was a Red Cross nurse around the time of World War I, and then other family relations shown in these other pictures. Ed was born in 1947. Ed Thiede was born in 1947 in Hamtramck, and at the time, his family, mother and siblings, lived in an upper flat of a home here on Lyman Street. And you see this, that is in the area that was demolished in 1981 for the General Motors plant. They lived in a flat right over here, an upper flat on Lyman, that was owned by Ed's maternal grandmother. So Ed's mother's mother, who lived on the lower floor with some of Ed's aunts. And the Thiede family lived here for 10 years, from 1947 to 1957. And then Ed's father decided he wanted to move the family south about a mile to his mother's house on Du Bois Street. It was a bigger house. It was a bigger flat. So they packed up their belongings, probably came down Shane Street here and moved into this upper flat in the St. Stanislaus Parish, St. Stanislaus Church area. So this was Ed's really almost only major relocation in his lifetime. He did go to Vietnam around 1967, 68, and then he later had to leave this Du Bois neighborhood where I met him. Now I'm back on Lyman. This is where Ed spent the first 10 years of his life, and these were pictures from Ed's scrapbook. Aunt Irene Peshtushka, and in my recent Facebook doings on a Shane Street Facebook site, I have met members of the Peshtushka family. One gentleman I met, this is his mother, and I showed this picture, and he had never seen this picture, so he was quite surprised. He said, "Oh my gosh, that's my mother. I've never seen that picture." So it was quite moving. So that's Lyman looking towards Shane Street. 1942 is the year on the license plate. This is Ed's mother. Also, we can see these big double flats that existed on Lyman. And of course, they're all demolished in 81. I probably saw a lot of these homes. They were still standing. Ed's mother. And then this is jumping south to the Du Bois neighborhood where Ed's family moved, the old neighborhood on Du Bois Street. And this is Du Bois. So this was Ed's street. Ed's house was right in between this home, and this is actually a business, perhaps with residents above. This was a funeral home. I found. I have pictures of it. Old pictures of it when it was a funeral home. But Ed's house was right in between these two buildings. So as I said, it was set back, so you can't really see it here. It's not right up on the street like some of these others. And you can see it's just down the street from Ed's parish, where his family attended all the time that they lived in this area. This is a surveyor's document, and you can see the address here is what did I say Ed's address was? 5982. So this is the building that was, Ed's house was in back. This was built in front of Ed's house. So this is the building that was in front of Ed's house at one time until it was demolished. Some sort of an official document done by a surveyor. I was invited in. I took pictures of Ed, and I had a certain way I worked. I took pictures back to Ed, and he was gregarious, friendly, outgoing guy. So he invited me in, and I was able to photograph him inside of his home, and also take a lot of pictures just of things inside of his home. Ed, he was a musician in high school. He was in a band. They played at dances, and even later in life, he would perform, I think, at the Hamtramck festival. He'd play, and he wasn't an Elvis impersonator, but he took on the persona. He sort of had the Elvis look. Ed was a collector. He had those scrapbooks, but he also collected, he had a lot of pictures in his home of celebrities, and he was in quite a few of them. He was able to track down these people when they were in Detroit and have his picture taken with them. So he was an avid collector. And the thing that I'll talk about a little bit is Ed, you have to keep in mind is that Ed suffered from chronic pain. And I'm not sure Ed really knew why, but he had a lot of pain, particularly on, I think, the left side, hip and leg. And I could tell often when I was with him that it was very difficult and very, very painful for him just to move around. So it was very, very tough. This is taken at the same time. You can see some of these celebrity pictures. Here's Jay Leno. Here's Bob Hope, Bob Hope's wife, Doc Severinsen, Connie Stevens. Here's George and Barbara Bush. And this picture, it's showing, this is the front door of Ed's house that went out to his porch. These are all of his pictures. It shows just a little bit more of his,
before you buy it, then
of his living room. And a little more pensive Ed. Again, here's Ed with Willie Nelson. Kind of hard to recognize who all these people are, but all celebrities. Ricky Skaggs, and a picture of Elvis, and Ed said this was an actual Elvis Presley signature on that particular poster. This is Ed's den. Ed learned. Ed told me once that in order to help keep his mind off of his pain, he had all these hobbies. He took on all these different things. He really tried to keep his mind occupied, and he learned taxidermy on a correspondence course. So these animals were stuffed by Ed. He also collected these small bottles. So this is how Ed's room, here's a picture of Ed and his girlfriend Carol. This is how Ed's room looked. This is just kind of a close-up of the corner of the room with a sort of a scraggly looking fox that Ed prepared. This plaque says Detroit River Salmon Champ, 1978, Ed Thiede. I'll have a little bit more about that in a moment, but remember that plaque. Same room, just looking in the opposite direction. I tried to photograph, most of the walls in all of the rooms, so we'd have a thorough record of all the things that were in these various houses. This is Ed's bedroom. Again, all these celebrity portraits, I'm sure you would recognize. So Barbara Walters, Telly Savalas, Cher, Vanna White, Al Kaline, Tom Selleck. And here's Ed in his military army outfit when he was in Vietnam. This is a letter. Ed, there was a time, you know the actress, of course, Elizabeth Taylor. There was a time in her life when she was a little older when she too had some sort of chronic condition that caused her pain. I remember it at the time, and Ed wrote her a empathetic letter because Ed kind of went through the same thing, and she wrote him back. And this is Elizabeth Taylor. Here's a picture of Elizabeth Taylor, and here's Elizabeth Taylor's typed and signed letter. And the letter reads, Dear Ed, your expression of caring and thoughtfulness has truly helped to support me in these last few difficult months. Thank you for taking the time to write me and for your sensitivity and love. Love, Elizabeth. So that was quite a wonderful possession that Ed had. This is Ed's workshop. Now this is the salmon for which Ed won the salmon champion. The salmon caught in the Detroit River, and I can't read it here, but it no doubt says that on that little plaque. This is when they were trying to, restock the river with fish, and maybe it had been, I guess the Detroit River had been polluted for years, and they were trying to bring back fishing the Detroit River, so they promoted it. Same workshop where Ed worked on a lot of his hobbies in this room. Just to show Ed's kitchen, stove, things he had on the walls. Now back to Ed's scrapbooks, and here are family pictures, Aunt Celie, family members here on Belle Isle. And this page, this is Ed's first Holy Communion, May 1st, 1955. Edmund Thiede, first Holy Communion at St. Stanislaus Church. Ed was a altar boy at the church from kindergarten through high school. He was an athlete. He won all state in 2 or 3, basketball, football, baseball. He played all sports. Very athletic. Later in life, he was a coach for various teams at St. Stanislaus before and after he came back from Vietnam. Parents were married in St. Stanislaus, so they had a real strong connection with St. Stanislaus Church. It says down at the bottom, me when I made my first Holy Communion. And these are some pictures later when Ed was, here's Ed Thiede, freshman, Nancy Winesek, girlfriend, to some of Ed's friends at St. Stanislaus School, some relatives. Here's the church. The pastor and the principal, faculty are all listed. And here, For America for President, John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. Date here is 1961, which is that when Kennedy was elected, 61 or 62. Another picture from Ed's pages from Ed's scrapbook. This is interesting. This is the family in the home in Du Bois, and you can read the caption: Ma, Jerry, Bobby, me having a drink, and Kathy celebrating my first morning home from Vietnam. Dad cooking breakfast. Here's his father cooking breakfast. Just a variety of people and events represented in these scrapbooks. Here's Ed's home. It told me about the neighborhood back in the 60s, and of course, a very nice neighborhood. Everybody decorated their homes for the holidays. Everybody was out on the streets, and this is Ed's home around Christmas time. And his cards, "I love you, honey," to his girlfriend Carol. Ed kept everything and put it in his scrapbooks. And this is the newspaper article about the fishing contest on the Detroit River. And the first line here is, "Our hero of the month is Detroiter Ed Thiede, who hooked and landed a 20-pound Chinook salmon in the channel behind the Detroit Yacht Club on Belle Isle." So that's, Ed was quite proud of that award. Ed's great-great-grandparents founded and maintained a hardware store in the St. Stanislaus area for a number of years, quite a successful business. And you can see the caption: great-grandma Agnes Thiede and great-grandfather Lawrence Thiede in front of the Thiede brothers hardware. Again, more from the scrapbook. Ed's father was in World War II. Some pictures that Ed's father took during the war, ruins of World War II. These two pictures are labeled. Dad and an army buddy, dad and army buddies. Picture my dad head in the army, daydreaming of being with Ma. Kind of speaks for itself. Just things that they had in the barracks. This is Ed's Aunt Celie, who I met in '89 out on Du Bois Street. This was a flag. Someone told me about this. Who lived in the neighborhood. They had this area where they put this flag out, and people would just go there from the neighborhood to have their picture taken. Maybe they gathered there on certain Flag Day or certain holidays. But this wasn't just a happenstance picture. This was sort of a deliberate a place where they had this flag. Picture of Pauline Thiede, Ed's grandmother. You can read it. Grandmother, her photo was blown up and put on billboards, urging people to buy U.S. savings bonds in the 1940s during the war. This is Ed's parents' wedding in St. Stanislaus Church, May 18th, 1946. And this is the wedding party, Ed's parents near the center there, the names of everyone. Another scrapbook page. These are back at the house on the top here on Lyman Street. You can see this was Ed's upper flat. So you look down onto Lyman Street. With Aunt Irene reading the newspaper, and Ed's mother sitting on the porch, and various other family members. A lot in the scrapbooks about Ed kept documents and cards, articles about the church, pages and pages of things all about the church, all about St. Stanislaus. This is Ed's picture taken of Ed, portrait of Ed when he was in Vietnam. Ed, he lived with his paternal grandmother on Du Bois, but in early 70s, he met his future wife, and they moved to a flat across the street where they had two daughters. And around this time, is when Ed started experiencing this debilitating pain. And according to Ed, it played some role in the breakup of his marriage. So they were separated, and his wife left, and Ed got custody of his two daughters. And so they lived with Ed on Du Bois Street, and he said that he raised his two daughters with the help of his extended family, who also lived in the neighborhood. And his two daughters were with him until they got to the age where they could leave home. And they did both leave as young women, and Ed stayed in his home on Du Bois Street. But he moved from the flat after his separation. He moved to the house where I met him, and that's where he raised his two daughters. And this is a scrapbook page dedicated to his first child, Dawn Marie. This was his wife at the time, Sharon. And this is the second daughter, Kimberly. Kimberly's first haircut. Here's Ed's driver's license from that's his birthday, 1947. Year 1986. Later, of course, the church, Archdiocese decided to close the church in the mid to late 80s, and the parishioners who still lived in the area fought it. So this was a big rally that they had in the church to try to, reunion mass to keep St. Stanislaus open. But of course, and this was, of course, 8 years after the Immaculate Conception and the Pole Town area was demolished. But they did all they could, diminishing attendance at the church and the cost of maintaining the church. And it was determined that the church was going to be closed. And indeed, the church was finally closed despite all the efforts to keep it open. Just another page from Ed's scrapbook. You can see what he put in here. Close crack houses, not churches. Let our churches live. And here's Ed at the bottom with something it says on there. Around the time I met Ed, I managed to get into St. Stanislaus. I just went over there one day and the door was opened, and I went into the church, and I happened to come upon a wedding in progress, which you see here. Here are the bride and groom walking toward the altar. Here's a photographer down on one knee taking a picture with the wedding party waiting up at the front of the church. So I took a few pictures that day, and I went back a week later and got permission to go inside the church, and I took quite a few more pictures just of the church the way it was. And it closed and locked their doors not too long after that, in July of 1989. This is the rectory of the church just a few years ago. The church is now, it was a black church for a while, but they moved out, and it's abandoned building now, locked up. But you can see how the rectory is deteriorating. I went into the rectory in '89 and took pictures in a lot of the rooms of the rectory of the priest and some workers in the rectory. I think it's even in worse condition today. This picture was from 2 or 3 years ago, but it's sort of sad what, this neighborhood, how what's happened to it since its glory days in the 60s and 70s, and now there's so little left. I lost touch with Ed 1990 or so, but I continue to go back to the neighborhood. And about 10 years ago, I met someone who knew Ed Thiede, and I was put in touch with him, and he was able to tell me where Ed was living at that time. It was a rehabilitation center out in Southfield, Michigan. So I went out there.
Brian?
And sure enough, I found Ed. So I started to visit him here, and he was happy here. But he was active. He was sort of the head of a social group. He organized activities for people in the rehab center, games and like video sports events, parties. So I would visit him every month or so, pick up things for him. He liked licorice. I would bring him licorice, and we talked quite a bit about the old days. This is a picture in Ed's room, and you won't be surprised to see that he decorated his room in this where he was living in the same manner that he decorated his home, with lots of pictures of celebrities and various people. Matter of fact, here's one. Here's the picture of Jay Leno and Ed that was in his house. And when I was visiting Ed at this rehab center, we started talking about his scrapbooks. I asked him about the scrapbooks, and he told me that a friend of his still had all these scrapbooks down on a house down on Du Bois Street. And Ed wanted me to go down there and see if I could. He was worried that these scrapbooks would be lost wanted me to go and see if I could find them. So I went down there and I was able to get in touch with this gentleman. And I explained the situation to him, that I was in touch with Ed and Ed wanted his scrapbooks, and he was willing to let me have them. So I took them, and Ed didn't want them in his room, so I had them here in my home for a while. And that's when I was able to make all the scans, make all the copies of a lot of the pages in these scrapbooks. I also changed some of the binders. Some of the binders were falling apart, so I got new binders for them and make sure they held together. Ed, over the course of my time visiting Ed, he talked about, he's hoped to have some sort of a
Yeah,
treatment
that's okay. I'm listening to this. Bruce
That would-
Harkness in Detroit, he's got a thing where he's showing old pictures.
that would help him. And they would take him to a hospital on certain occasions. And he was hoping that they could do something to relieve his pain, which he still had. But it didn't work out. He'd even hoped that, if there was a possibility he would be able to move someplace else. And he got ill and he passed away. And I was put in touch with his daughters. I was able to contact them, and I was the one that told them initially that their dad was in the hospital, and they came up to visit. And I talked with them, and I was able to give all the scrapbooks to his two daughters. They thought that the scrapbooks had long since been lost, so they were quite happy to be able to have those scrapbooks in their possession. Ed passed away. I attended the funeral, and this is a big display that the Lakeland Rehab Center made. All these combined all these pictures of Ed's friends, his time at the rehab center and elsewhere. They had this on display, sort of a gathering for Ed. And these are all Ed's friends at the rehab center. These are his daughters, these two young women with the dark hair. This is the younger daughter, Kimberly, and the older daughter. So this is Ed's burial at Mount Olivet Cemetery on the east side, July 31st, 2012, and a number of other of Ed's family are buried in this same plot at Mount Elliott. This was taken just a few years ago, and this is Ed's home on Du Bois Street. You remember the earlier pictures. Here is that tree that I said make a note of this tree in one of the very first pictures I showed. Has grown a lot over the years. And here is the eagle emblem that you saw in the 1989 picture taken on the 4th of July. I sort of kept my eye on this place, and I know that I'm going to go over there someday, and this house will be gone. This house will either collapse or be demolished. So I took this. I think of it as more of a beneficent appropriation than I do outright thievery. I did have the cooperation of a neighbor there. He helped me take it off the house, but I thought it would be a good idea to take this off the house and save it as a memento of Ed's life. So I have it here in my proud possession of mine. I'd like to finish, if this works, by playing. I have a recording of Ed's voice reciting a poem. I'm going to see if I can bring it up. I'll just hold my phone up to the screen here and see how this goes. So listen to this.
One day I was just down and I used to think about how my grandmother, she's 91 now, so I wrote her a poem one time, and the name of the poem was called You're the World's Best Grandma. So I wrote, you're the world's best grandma, and as sweet as can be. And I hope these words will tell you what you really mean to me. Grandma, I'll never forget, for me, all that you have done. We shared a lot of good times, and we always did have fun. I remember one Christmas walking downtown and you holding my hand, and you took me to Hudson's to see Santa in Toyland. And then when he sat me on his lap, I just started to cry. But you came up to me and wiped all my tears dry, and then you asked me why. Then you told me if I didn't cry and was a good boy, that Santa would give me a brand new shiny toy. And I didn't get a gift from Santa that day. No, and I did get a gift from Santa that day, a brand new kazoo. But somehow I knew that it wasn't from Santa, Grandma. It was from you. You bought me my first electric train, a camera, and my first guitar. You were a jolly Mrs. Santa and the best grandma by far. And I'll never forget one time when you put up my hair in pin curls with rollers and a stocking as you sat me on a chair. And when I first got married and I needed a new home, it was you who I came to for help, and you gave me a loan. See, my grandma borrowed me a lot of money. And whenever I got sick, lying in bed needing a cure, it was your old-fashioned remedies that always worked for sure. And I remember your 90th birthday when you danced with me. I was so proud you were my grandma, as proud could be. Thanks for everything, Grandma, and I want you to know that you are the world's greatest grandma, and I love you so. Love your grandson.
So that was Ed's voice. Quite a guy. I'm thankful that I was able to meet him and share a little bit of his life. Really a remarkable, brave guy. Always have good memories of him. So that's it from me. I don't know if we have time for any comments or questions, but thank you.